It was one of those calm afternoons when the sun was low, painting the sky with a soft orange glow. The streets were quiet, and a cool breeze moved through the trees as a 16-year-old boy walked home from basketball practice. He was tall and lean, with his gym bag slung over one shoulder and his favorite hoodie pulled up against the chill. The rhythmic sound of his sneakers on the sidewalk mixed with the low beat of the music playing through his headphones. It was his routine walk home, one he had taken hundreds of times before without a single problem. He passed the same old corner store, waved at the owner who always stood outside, and kept walking down the familiar road toward his neighborhood. His mind was still on practice, thinking about how he could improve his jump shot and how tired his legs felt. He was already imagining the warm dinner waiting for him when he got home. For him, it was just another normal evening, but normal didn't last long. A patrol car rolled slowly up the street behind him. The boy didn't notice at first, too caught up in his music. Inside the car, two officers glanced at him, then at each other. One of them pointed slightly, saying something the boy couldn't hear. They had just received a report about a suspicious person in the area, someone wearing a hoodie, supposedly looking into parked cars. The description was vague, but it was enough to catch their attention. The police lights suddenly flicked on. The boy jumped, pulling out his earbuds as he turned around. The bright red and blue lights bounced off the windows around him. Confused, he stopped walking. His heart began to race. He had no idea what was going on. He looked behind him, unsure whether to run, wave, or stand still. One of the officers stepped out of the car, resting his hand on his belt as he called out, "Hey, you!" "Stop right there." The boy froze. He could feel the tension in his stomach, the way it suddenly twisted. He replied softly, trying to stay calm. "What's wrong, officer?" "I'm just walking home." The officer didn't answer right away. He looked the boy up and down, then said, "We got a call about someone matching your description. Mind telling me where you're coming from?" The boy blinked, confused. "From the school gym," he said. "Basketball practice. I live just down the street." But his calm voice didn't seem to help. The second officer stepped out, standing near the patrol car, watching closely. The first officer frowned, moving closer. "You got any ID on you?" The boy nodded quickly and reached for his pocket. But the sudden movement made one officer tense up. "Hey, keep your hands where I can see them." The officer snapped. The boy froze again, his hand half out of his pocket. His voice shook a little. I was just getting my wallet. You asked for my ID." The air between them grew heavy. The street was quiet except for the soft hum of the police car engine. The boy slowly lifted his hands, showing they were empty. His breathing quickened. He wasn't sure what he had done wrong. All he knew was that he was scared. Scared of being misunderstood. "Calm down, kid," the second officer said, stepping a little closer. "We just want to talk." The first officer, however, kept his hand near his holster. His tone stayed sharp. "What are you doing around here? There's been some trouble in the area lately. You live nearby, huh? Then how come we haven't seen you before?" The boy tried to explain, stumbling over his words. "I live on Maple Street. I walk home this way every day. I didn't do anything, I promise." "You can check. We'll decide that," the officer interrupted. A few people nearby had stopped to watch. A couple walking their dog paused at the corner. Someone across the street took out their phone. The boy could feel all those eyes on him, and it made his throat tighten. He didn't want to make a scene. He just wanted to go home. "Can I please just call my mom?" he asked, his voice small. "Not yet," one of the officers replied. "We just need to make sure everything checks out." The first officer stepped behind him now, telling him to put his hands behind his back. The boy's chest tightened. He took a half step forward instinctively, shaking his head. "Wait, I didn't do anything." "Please, you can ask anyone." The officer grabbed his wrist. The boy stiffened, terrified. He could feel the cold metal of the cuffs brushing against his skin. He wasn't fighting, but his voice rose in panic. "I didn't do anything." "I swear." "Stop resisting," the officer barked. "I'm not," the boy cried. The people watching grew restless. Someone shouted from the sidewalk, "He's just a kid!" But the officers kept moving, one holding the boy's arm, the other checking his bag. His basketball rolled out and hit the curb, spinning quietly until it stopped. The sight of it made the boy's chest ache. That ball was supposed to take him somewhere, not end up bouncing on the street while he was being treated like a criminal. The second officer opened the bag, finding only gym clothes and sneakers. He looked up, and for a brief second, guilt flickered in his eyes. But the first officer wasn't backing down. "We still have to verify his story," he muttered. The boy stood there trembling. His wrist hurt where the cuffs pressed against his skin. He felt humiliated. Every second felt longer than the last. He kept thinking about his mom, how she always told him to stay polite, to never raise his voice, to always keep his hands visible if he ever got stopped by police. He was doing everything right, but it didn't seem to matter. He wanted to scream, to tell them they were wrong, but fear held him silent. He didn't want to make things worse. The officers talked quietly to each other, checking something on their radio. The boy looked down at the pavement, trying not to cry. He could feel people still watching, still recording. He wished the ground would just open up and swallow him. Minutes felt like hours. The officers kept asking the same questions. "Where are you from? What are you doing here? Who can vouch for you?" He kept giving the same answers. But the more he explained, the less they seemed to believe him. A woman nearby stepped forward, her voice trembling with anger. "I see that kid walk home every day from the gym," she said. "He's not doing anything wrong. You should let him go." The officers hesitated, looking at each other. The first one frowned and turned to her. "Ma'am, please step back. We're handling this." The boy looked up hopefully, thinking maybe now they'd realize their mistake. But the officer just sighed and turned back to him. "We're going to call this in," he said. "If everything checks out, you can go." The boy nodded weakly, too tired to speak. He stood there, cuffed, as they called for confirmation. He stared at the ground, counting his breaths, trying to calm the shaking in his hands. His chest felt tight, his throat dry. The sky above was turning darker now, and all he wanted was to be home. Safe. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he wondered if his mom was home yet. She usually texted him around this time to ask if he wanted something for dinner. He imagined her voice calm and reassuring, and it made his eyes sting. He didn't know that just a few blocks away she was already growing worried. She had texted him twice, but there was no reply. When she checked the location app on her phone, she saw he was stopped on a street he should have already passed. Her instincts told her something wasn't right. Back on the street, the officers kept waiting for a response from dispatch. The first one looked uneasy now, realizing how tense the situation had become. The boy was silent, standing still, staring at the ground. He didn't say another word. The sound of cars passing in the distance filled the silence. Finally, the radio crackled. The report said there was no match, no criminal record, no connection to any recent incident. The officers exchanged a quick look. The first officer cleared his throat awkwardly. "All right," he said, his tone softer now. "Seems like it was a misunderstanding. You can go." He uncuffed the boy, avoiding his eyes. The boy rubbed his wrists, too shocked to speak. He wanted to ask why they treated him that way, why they didn't just listen, but he couldn't find the words. The officers got back into their car, mumbling something about doing their job. The patrol lights switched off and the car slowly pulled away. The boy stood there, numb, as the crowd began to disperse. His basketball still sat by the curb. He picked it up, brushing the dirt off, and started walking again. A little slower this time, his shoulders heavy. He felt different now, like something inside him had changed. He didn't know that within minutes another car would be racing toward that very street, and the woman behind the wheel, his mother, would soon turn that quiet block into a scene no one would forget. The sound of tires screeching broke the uneasy silence on that quiet street. A black SUV pulled up fast, stopping right beside the patrol car that was just about to leave. The door flew open and a woman stepped out, moving with purpose. She was tall, dressed in dark office clothes, her face calm but her eyes blazing with anger and fear. In one hand she held her badge, shining under the fading streetlight. She didn't even have to say who she was. The confidence in her walk said it all. Her son turned, relief flooding his face the moment he saw her. His shoulders, which had been tense and slumped, suddenly straightened. "Mom," he called out, his voice shaking. He didn't know whether to cry or run to her. The officers froze. One of them opened his mouth, but no words came out. The woman raised her badge higher and spoke clearly, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Special Agent Carter, FBI. What exactly is going on here?" Her tone wasn't loud, but it carried weight. You could feel the power in it. The two officers instantly straightened, their expressions shifting from authority to shock. One stuttered, trying to form an answer. "Ma'am, we got a report about a suspect." She stepped closer, her eyes hard. "A suspect?" This boy is 16 years old and just walking home from practice. Did you even check before putting your hands on him? The second officer looked at the ground. The first one tried again, nervous now. We were just following a call description. It matched. Matched what? She interrupted. Matched his skin color and hoodie? That's not a description. That's an excuse. Her son stood still, watching her in awe. He had never seen her like this before. At home, she was gentle, warm, always patient. But here she was different, calm, fierce, and unshakable. The officers had no idea who they were dealing with. She turned back to her son and touched his shoulder gently. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. He nodded, though his eyes were still red. His voice trembled. "They said I looked like someone. They wouldn't let me talk." Her jaw tightened. She faced the officers again. "You handcuffed a child because of a vague report and assumptions. Do you have any idea how dangerous that was?" The officers looked around, aware of the small crowd that had gathered. Several people were recording now. The woman didn't care about the cameras. She wanted answers. She wanted accountability. "Give me your names and badge numbers," she said firmly. The first officer hesitated, then slowly recited his name and number. The second followed. She wrote them down, her movements sharp and deliberate. The air felt heavy, every eye on her. "You'll be hearing from Internal Affairs," she said flatly. The first officer swallowed hard. "Ma'am, we didn't mean any harm. We were just doing our job." She looked him in the eye. "Doing your job doesn't mean ignoring judgment. Doing your job means protecting people, not terrifying them. Especially not a kid who did nothing wrong." Her son stayed close to her, silent but steady. She could feel him trembling slightly, and it broke her heart. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her own anger. She didn't want to yell, she wanted them to listen. "This happens too often," she said quietly. "I've worked with officers who risked their lives for the right reasons. But scenes like this undo all that good work. It's not about you versus us. It's about learning to see people as human beings first." The second officer nodded faintly, guilt showing in his eyes. The first one looked away, saying nothing. The crowd began to murmur, some clapping softly, others just whispering in disbelief. They knew what they had just witnessed, a moment where power shifted and truth stood its ground. The woman gently placed her arm around her son's shoulders and began to lead him toward her car. But before leaving, she turned back one last time. Her voice was firm but controlled. "You're lucky this didn't end worse. Next time, think before you act. That boy could have been anyone's son." She opened the car door and guided her son inside. As they drove off, the flashing lights faded in the rearview mirror. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel, her mind racing. She glanced at her son, who stared quietly out the window, his face pale and distant. "You okay, sweetheart?" she asked gently. He hesitated, then nodded. "I was scared," he said softly. "I didn't even do anything. I thought they were gonna—" He stopped, his voice catching. She reached over and squeezed his hand. "I know," she said quietly. "You did everything right. None of this was your fault." They drove in silence for a while. The city lights reflected in the car windows, blurring past like fading stars. The boy finally spoke again. "Does this happen a lot?" he asked. She hesitated. She didn't want to scare him, but she couldn't lie either. "More than it should," she said softly. "That's why people like me fight for change from the inside. So that one day it doesn't happen to kids like you." He looked at her, trying to understand. "Do you think they'll get in trouble?" She sighed. "Maybe, maybe not. But what matters is that they learn from it, and that others do too. Sometimes it takes one story, one mistake to make people finally pay attention." He nodded slowly, letting her words sink in. The fear in his eyes began to fade, replaced by a quiet strength. He was still shaken, but something about hearing her speak gave him comfort. She wasn't just his mom. She was a protector, a fighter. When they finally pulled into their driveway, he didn't get out right away. He sat there, looking at his hands, remembering the feel of those cold cuffs. She turned off the engine and sat with him in silence for a moment. Then she said softly, "You did everything right today. I need you to know that." He looked at her, his eyes glistening. "I didn't even do anything wrong, but they still looked at me like I was." "I know," she whispered. "And that's what hurts the most. But you can't let them make you doubt who you are. You're strong, smart, and kind. Don't ever forget that." He nodded slowly. She reached over and hugged him tight. He held on to her like he never wanted to let go. For a long moment, neither of them said a word. There was only the sound of the wind rustling the trees outside and the faint hum of the streetlights. Later that night, she sat at the kitchen table typing up a report. As a federal agent, she knew exactly what to do. Document everything, every word, every action. She wasn't doing it out of revenge. She was doing it to make sure something changed. The officers needed to be held accountable, but more importantly, the system needed to listen. Her son came into the kitchen wearing his old hoodie again, the same one that had caused all the trouble. She smiled sadly when she saw him. "You still wearing that?" she asked gently. He shrugged. "Yeah, I don't want to be scared of it." Her heart swelled with pride. She nodded. "That's the spirit." He poured himself a glass of milk and sat down beside her. For the first time that night, he smiled a little. "You were really something back there," he said quietly. They didn't know what hit them. She chuckled softly. "Sometimes you have to remind people who they're talking to." He laughed weakly. The tension between them finally began to ease. For the first time since the incident, the house felt safe again. But as she watched her son finish his milk, she knew the world outside wasn't as kind. There were still too many people who saw kids like him as threats instead of dreams and progress. And that thought made her heart ache. When he went to bed, she sat in the quiet kitchen a little longer, staring at the file on her laptop. Tomorrow she would make the calls. She would file the complaint, push for an internal review, and make sure no one swept this under the rug. She owed that to her son, and to every other parent who feared getting that kind of call. As she finally closed her laptop, she whispered to herself, "This has to mean something." And for the first time that night, she let herself breathe deeply, knowing she had done what she could. Upstairs, her son lay awake staring at the ceiling. The night was quiet, but his thoughts were loud. He thought about how fast things could change, how quickly safety could turn to fear. But he also thought about his mom, the way she stood tall, how her voice didn't shake even once. He smiled faintly in the dark. If she could be that strong, maybe he could learn to be, too. And with that thought, his eyes slowly closed, and he drifted into sleep, safe at last, but forever changed by what had happened. The next morning began quietly. The sun had barely risen, and soft light spilled across the kitchen table where the boy sat, staring at his cereal without really eating it. His mom moved around the kitchen dressed for work, her face calm but distant. The night before still hung in the air like a heavy cloud neither of them could shake off. The sound of the spoon clinking against the bowl filled the silence. He finally looked up. "Are you going to the station today?" he asked quietly. She paused, then nodded. "Yes," she said simply. "I have a meeting downtown, but after that I'll be stopping by the precinct." Her tone was measured, but her eyes said more. She was still angry, though she hid it well. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he whispered, "Are they in trouble?" She sighed and sat across from him. "There will be an investigation," she said carefully. "They'll have to explain their actions. What happens next depends on what their department decides." She took his hand gently. "I just want them to understand how wrong it was. I don't want another kid to go through what you did." He nodded slowly. His mom's voice was soft, but he could feel the strength in it. She wasn't just talking about justice for him. She was talking about something bigger, something that had been happening for a long time. She stood up, grabbed her keys, and kissed the top of his head. "You'll be okay getting to school?" He nodded again. "Yeah, I'll walk with Josh," he said, naming his friend from down the street. She smiled faintly. "Good. Text me when you get there." As the door closed behind her, the house felt quiet again. The boy finished his breakfast slowly, still thinking about the night before. He couldn't shake the feeling of those flashing lights or the cold touch of the handcuffs. It had been less than 24 hours, but it already felt like a memory that would never fade. At school, he tried to act normal. His friends noticed he was quieter than usual. When one of them asked if something was wrong, he just said, "Rough night," and changed the subject. But the truth was, he couldn't stop replaying it in his head. Every time he saw a police car drive by, his chest tightened. He kept remembering the way they looked at him, as if they'd already decided who he was before he even spoke. Meanwhile, his mother drove downtown. Her face stayed steady, but her mind was racing. She had spent years working in law enforcement, fighting for fairness and truth. She had trained officers, reviewed cases, and worked alongside people who genuinely wanted to protect their communities. But yesterday reminded her of the reason she joined the force in the first place, to change the system from within. When she arrived at the precinct, she parked calmly and walked in, her badge clipped neatly to her belt. The front desk officer looked up, startled to see a federal agent. "Morning, ma'am. How can I help you?" he asked politely. "I'm here regarding the incident that occurred on Maple Street last night," she said firmly. "Two of your officers detained my son without cause." The officer blinked, immediately looking uncomfortable. "Yes, ma'am. The captain mentioned you might be coming by. He's expecting you in his office." She nodded once and walked past him. Every step she took echoed softly through the hall. When she reached the office, the captain stood up to greet her. He was an older man with kind eyes but a heavy look of guilt on his face. "Agent Carter," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I saw the report this morning. I'm truly sorry about what happened." She sat down, keeping her posture straight. "I appreciate that, but sorry doesn't undo what my son experienced. He was treated like a suspect for simply existing in his own neighborhood. That's not just a mistake, it's a pattern." The captain nodded slowly.
I understand.
"We're reviewing the body cam footage and the officers' reports. From what I've seen so far, the situation was handled poorly. They'll be questioned this afternoon." She took a breath, keeping her emotions steady. "This isn't about revenge, Captain. I've worked with good cops my whole career. I know what this job demands. But I also know fear and bias can cloud judgment. If they can do this to my son, what's happening to kids who don't have a mother in the FBI?" The captain looked down at his desk for a moment, then back up at her. "You're right," he said quietly. "We have a lot to fix." She stood, knowing there wasn't much more to say. "I'll be following up on the investigation," she said, "and I expect transparency." "You'll have it," he promised. When she left the station, she stood outside for a moment, breathing in the crisp morning air. She felt a mix of anger, sadness, and resolve. This wasn't the first time she had seen injustice, but it was the first time it had touched her family so directly. She looked up at the sky, whispering under her breath, "This has to change." Back at school, her son tried to focus on his classes, but the whispers started spreading. Someone had seen the video online. A neighbor who filmed the scene had posted it, and it was now being shared around social media. By lunchtime, several students had already seen it. Some came up to him with sympathy, others just stared. He didn't like the attention. When he checked his phone, he saw hundreds of comments, some supportive, some cruel. His stomach twisted as he read strangers debating what happened to him as if it were just another story. He put the phone away, feeling overwhelmed. That afternoon, when he got home, his mom was already there. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her laptop. She looked up when he walked in. "You saw it too, didn't you?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Everyone at school did. I didn't want them to." She closed the laptop and patted the seat beside her. "Come here." He sat down and she looked at him carefully. "I know it's hard seeing yourself out there like that, but maybe this video will make people think twice. It's not just about us anymore, it's about what needs to change." He frowned. "But I don't want to be some story online. I just want to forget it." She nodded slowly. "I know, but sometimes we don't get to choose how life teaches us lessons. What matters is what we do with them. You didn't deserve what happened, but you can decide how it shapes you." He looked down, fidgeting with his hands. "You really think it'll change anything?" "I think it already has," she said softly. "People are talking. The department's under review. The community is paying attention. That's how change starts. One uncomfortable conversation at a time." She smiled faintly and nudged his shoulder. "And you were brave. Don't forget that," he smiled back a little shyly. "I wasn't brave. I was scared the whole time." "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," she said. "It means you kept going anyway." That night they ate dinner together quietly. The TV was on in the background, playing a news report about the growing discussion around police behavior. The reporter mentioned the Maple Street incident briefly, calling it a wake-up call. The mother and son exchanged a glance, both feeling the weight of those words. Later, when she tucked him in, he looked up at her and said softly, "You really think something good can come out of all this?" She smiled gently. "I do, because sometimes the hardest stories are the ones that make people listen." He nodded, his eyes growing heavy with sleep. She brushed his hair back and kissed his forehead before turning off the light. Downstairs, she sat by the window, watching the street outside. The same street where it all happened just a day ago. It looked peaceful now, quiet and still. but she knew how quickly peace could turn into fear. She picked up her phone and sent a message to a local community leader she knew, asking to meet about police training programs. She wasn't going to let this end with an apology. As she sat there, she thought about all the parents who didn't have the chance to step in when their children were wronged. That thought stayed with her, giving her purpose. She promised herself that her son's experience wouldn't fade into just another headline. It would be a lesson, a story that made others see the truth. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, carrying the sounds of the city. Inside, she whispered to herself, "He's safe now. That's what matters most," but deep down, she knew safety wasn't enough. Not until things truly changed. And though the world outside still felt uncertain, that night, for the first time since everything happened, both mother and son slept peacefully, knowing they weren't alone, and that their story was already beginning to open eyes. The moment his mother stepped out of the car, everything around them seemed to stop. The flashing lights, the crowd's murmurs, the heavy sound of fear that had filled the air. It all went silent. She stood tall, calm but fierce, her badge glinting in the streetlight. The officers froze, their hands still resting on their belts, their eyes wide with confusion. No one expected this woman, in her sharp suit and calm authority, to walk straight toward them with such purpose. Her son stood there, hands still cuffed behind his back, his face pale and eyes glassy. He couldn't speak. For a moment he thought he was imagining her. Maybe his mind had finally broken under the fear, but when she spoke, her voice carried that same tone he had heard since childhood, the voice that meant things were about to change. Release him. Now. Her words were firm. Not loud, but every syllable landed with weight. The two officers exchanged looks, hesitant. One of them stammered, "Ma'am, please step back. We're handling an investigation here." She cut him off, pulling her badge from her pocket and holding it up. "Special Agent Carter, Federal Bureau of Investigation. And you're not handling anything until I say so." The silence that followed was heavy. The crowd watching began whispering again, phones still raised. The taller officer swallowed hard. He looked at her badge, then at her son, then back at her. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the cuffs. "Ma'am, there must be a misunderstanding," he said quietly, trying to sound professional. "Oh, there's no misunderstanding," she replied, stepping closer. "You stopped a 16-year-old boy for walking home from practice. You shoved him against your car. You cuffed him while he was trying to explain himself. The only misunderstanding here is how you think that's acceptable." The officer's mouth opened, but no words came out. The younger one beside him looked at the ground, his face flushed red. He muttered something about a call they'd received, a report of someone suspicious, but his voice faded as she turned her gaze on him. What was suspicious? His hoodie? His skin? Her voice was low now, almost calm, but there was steel behind every word. "You were supposed to protect him. Instead, you terrified him." Her son could barely breathe. Seeing his mother like this, so calm and yet burning with controlled anger, made the lump in his throat tighten. The officers quickly uncuffed him, their hands shaking. He rubbed his wrists, which were sore and red, and took a step toward her. She turned to him instantly, her eyes softening. She brushed a hand across his cheek. "You okay?" she whispered. He nodded, but the tears in his eyes said otherwise. She took his hand and stood between him and the officers. Her stance made it clear no one was touching her son again. "Give me your names," she said. Her voice had returned to that sharp, professional tone. "Both of you." The taller one hesitated. "Ma'am, please, there's no need for—" "I'm not asking," she interrupted. "I'm ordering you. Names, badge numbers now." The crowd began to shift. People were recording everything, whispering things like, "She's FBI," and "This is gonna blow up." The officers realized the situation was already out of their control. They gave her their names and badge numbers. She typed them into her phone without looking up. "I'll be requesting your body camera footage through official channels," she added, "and I expect it to show exactly what I just witnessed." One of the officers tried to defend himself. "Agent Carter, we didn't know." She stopped him with a single glance. "That's the problem," she said quietly. "You shouldn't need to know who someone's mother is to treat them with respect." For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sounds were the distant hum of traffic and the faint buzz of phone cameras still recording. Then she turned back to her son and guided him toward her car. He hesitated, looking back at the scene one last time. The flashing lights, the faces staring, the two officers still frozen in place. He felt a strange mix of relief and shame. Relief that it was over, shame that it had happened at all. As they got into the car, his mother sat quietly for a moment before starting the engine. Her hands were steady, but he could see the tension in her jaw. She didn't speak right away, and neither did he. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of everything they couldn't yet say. Finally, she exhaled and said softly, "You did everything right." He stared out the window. "It didn't matter," he murmured. Her heart broke a little at that. She wanted to tell him that it did matter, that being calm, being respectful, keeping his hands visible, those things kept him safe tonight. But she also knew he was right. It shouldn't have to matter. He shouldn't have to think about how to survive a walk home. When they reached their driveway, she parked and turned off the engine. "Look at me," she said gently. He turned toward her, his eyes still red. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "I know tonight was scary, but you're safe now. And I promise you this won't be ignored. What they did was wrong, and I'll make sure it's handled properly." He didn't reply, but he nodded slowly. She smiled faintly and added, "You're strong. Stronger than you realize," he managed a weak smile back. "You too," he said quietly. She chuckled softly, the first sound of warmth in what felt like hours. "I've had practice." Inside the house, the air felt different, still heavy but safe. He went to his room, dropped his bag on the floor, and sat on the edge of his bed. His hands still shook a little. He replayed everything in his head, the flashing lights, the shouting, the cold metal of the cuffs. Then the moment his mom appeared, calm, powerful, unstoppable. He realized how close things had come to going wrong, and it made his chest tighten. Downstairs, his mother sat at the kitchen table, laptop open. She was already typing her report. Her face was composed, her fingers steady, but her heart was still racing. Every line she typed felt like she was fighting for something bigger than just her son. It was for every child who'd ever been made to feel unsafe for simply existing. When her phone buzzed, she answered sharply. It was her supervisor. Word had already reached the office. Videos were circulating online. "Are you all right?" her supervisor asked. "I'm fine," she replied. "My son's fine. But we've got a problem." Her supervisor sighed. "We'll handle it, Agent Carter. Just send me your statement." "I will," she said, though her voice carried the quiet determination of someone who intended to do far more than that. After hanging up, she looked toward the stairs. She could hear faint movement from his room. She wanted to go up and comfort him again, but she knew he needed space. He was old enough to understand what had happened, and that understanding hurt in ways she couldn't fix overnight. She closed her laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. For years, she'd trained to face dangerous situations, to stay calm under pressure, but nothing compared to seeing her own child in danger, especially when the threat came from those sworn to protect him. Outside, the night had grown quiet again. The police cars were gone, the crowd dispersed. Only the faint glow of a streetlight remained. In that stillness, the weight of everything settled in. The officer's fear, the bystanders' gasps, her son's trembling hands, it all lingered in her mind. She whispered to herself, "They'll learn." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Upstairs, her son lay awake, staring at the ceiling just like her. He wasn't sure how to process what had happened. He kept seeing flashes, the lights, the fear in his mother's eyes when she first arrived. But mixed with that fear was pride. Pride that she had stood up for him, that she had turned a moment of helplessness into one of power. As he drifted toward sleep, he thought about what she said. "You did everything right." It didn't make him feel better yet, but it gave him something to hold on to. Maybe tomorrow it would start to mean more. And as the night deepened, both of them lay awake in different rooms, hearts connected by the same silent vow, that this moment would not be forgotten, and that they would face whatever came next together. The following morning felt different, heavy with the weight of yesterday but also full of new possibilities. The boy woke up earlier than usual, staring out the window at the calm neighborhood street. The sun was just beginning to rise, soft light spilling across the rooftops. He could still feel the tension in his shoulders from being stopped, cuffed, and questioned. But there was something else now, a quiet sense of hope, knowing that his mother had stood up for him. Downstairs, she was already awake, preparing breakfast. The smell of toast and eggs filled the kitchen. She had spent the night typing and making calls, making sure the internal review of the officers would begin promptly. The process was slow and she knew it wouldn't be perfect, but she had to start somewhere. "Morning," she said softly as he walked down the stairs, still rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Morning," he mumbled. His voice was quieter than usual, as if he were still processing everything. They sat together, eating in silence for a while. She watched him carefully, noticing the small ways he was still tense, his hands clenching and unclenching, the way he looked at the window every few seconds. He was safe now, but the fear had left a mark. After breakfast, she pulled out her laptop. "We have to make sure this gets documented properly," she said, showing him the screen. "Your story, exactly what happened, the way it unfolded. I'll send it to the department. They need to know everything." He watched her typing, impressed by how calm and controlled she was. Even after everything, she wasn't angry in the way he expected. She was focused, precise, determined. "Do people really listen when you write something like that?" he asked quietly. "Sometimes," she said, not looking up. "Sometimes it takes one clear story to make people start thinking differently. Other times it takes a lot more. But it has to start somewhere, and it starts with the truth." He nodded, feeling a little stronger just by hearing her say that. He began to understand that yesterday wasn't just about fear. It was about something bigger, about standing up for what was right. By mid-morning, she called a local community leader she knew, explaining the situation and suggesting a meeting to discuss better police training and awareness. She spoke calmly, professionally, but there was an urgency in her words that couldn't be ignored. The leader agreed to meet the following week, already moved by the seriousness of the case. Meanwhile, her son tried to go about his day. He went to school, walked past the students who had seen the video online and faced whispers and glances. Some of his classmates came up to him, offering quiet words of support. Others stared, curious or unsure. He tried to ignore them, focusing on his classes, but he could feel the eyes on him every moment. He thought about what his mother had said last night, that he was brave, that he had done everything right. It wasn't easy to believe, not when the fear was still so fresh. But as the day went on, he began to feel a little stronger, a little more certain that he had survived because of the right choices and because of his mother's presence. After school, he walked home slowly. The neighborhood looked different now. The sun had softened the streets, and he noticed the same corner store, the trees swaying gently, the small familiar details he had taken for granted. He felt a strange sense of gratitude for those ordinary things, realizing that safety and normalcy were treasures. His mother was waiting when he arrived. She greeted him with a hug, and he could feel the warmth and security in her arms. "How was school?" she asked. "Okay," he said softly, avoiding the full truth. He wasn't ready to relive the whispers and stares. "That's good," she said, patting his back. "We'll take it one step at a time. And remember, it's not your fault. You did everything right." Later, they sat together in the living room. She explained that she had filed her formal report with the police department, providing every detail of the incident. She also reached out to local media to share a message about awareness and accountability, carefully avoiding personal information that could make her son uncomfortable. She wanted the story to inspire change, not create more fear. Her son listened quietly, slowly realizing that his mother wasn't just protecting him. She was turning a scary experience into a lesson for everyone. He felt a mix of relief, pride, and hope. He understood that while what happened was wrong, it could lead to something good if people listened. In the evening, the news showed a small report about the incident, highlighting both the dangers of bias and the importance of accountability. The video clip included only general details, but it was enough to make people talk. Comments flooded online, some supportive, some critical, but her son noticed the overwhelming number of people calling for change and awareness. He turned to his mother. "Do you think it will help?" he asked. She smiled softly. "It already has," she said. "People are talking. They're thinking. That's how change starts. Small, slow, but steady." He nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He realized that yesterday had been terrifying, but it wasn't the end. His mother's actions had shown him that fear could be confronted, that courage could be quiet yet powerful. That night, as she tucked him into bed, he looked at her with new understanding. "Thank you for being there," he said simply. She kissed his forehead gently. "I'll always be there, and I'll make sure the world knows your story, so no one else has to feel the way you did last night." He closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of her presence, the strength she always seemed to carry. For the first time since the incident, he felt safe in the certainty that someone would stand up for him no matter what. Downstairs, she sat by the window, thinking about the future. The officers involved were under review, and she knew there would be consequences. But more importantly, she felt hope that the community, the school, and the department would begin conversations about bias, awareness, and fairness. She thought about every child who might benefit from this incident being brought to light, every parent who would now feel empowered to speak up. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from the precinct confirming that the internal review had started and that the body cam footage had been officially logged. She typed a quick reply, her mind racing through all the steps she would take to ensure accountability. It was far from over, but it had begun. As the house grew quiet, she reflected on how quickly life could shift in an instant, from ordinary to dangerous, from safe to terrifying. But she also reflected on the power of standing up, of using knowledge and authority for protection and change. She realized that her son had already learned a valuable lesson, even if he didn't fully understand it yet. Bravery was not the absence of fear, but the act of facing it. In the morning, she would continue her calls, meetings, and follow-ups. Her son would go back to school, a little stronger, a little wiser. Together, they had faced a moment that could have broken them. But instead, it had shown them the importance of courage, awareness, and standing up for what is right. And as the night drew to a close, mother and son slept in their home, connected by an unspoken understanding. They knew the world could be unfair and scary, but they also knew they had each other, and that together they could make a difference. The incident on Maple Street would not be forgotten. It would become a story of courage, accountability, and hope, proving that even in the darkest moments, one person's actions could shine a light for many. In the days that followed, the story spread quietly but steadily. Conversation started, awareness grew, and the department began reviewing policies and training programs. Parents, teachers, and students alike discussed the incident, slowly beginning to understand the impact of bias and fear. And through it all, the boy grew more confident, more aware, and more determined to move forward without fear controlling his life. The mother continued her work, not for recognition or praise, but for the simple purpose of making the world safer, fairer, and more just. And her son watched, learning that real courage comes not from fighting alone, but from knowing when to stand with others, when to speak, and when to act with integrity. Together, they faced the challenges that lay ahead, stronger and more resilient, knowing that change starts with a single act of courage and a commitment to never let fear define who you are.